thanks for the invitation, and yeah, good morning, everybody. Good evening, depending where you are. My name is Wojtek TOMASZEWSKI. I'm based at the University of Queensland in Australia, and I'm going to be talking about school-level factors that drive long-term outcomes for students from regional, rural, and remote areas in Australia, as Ning has already said. So I would like to acknowledge my co-authors, Francisco Perales, Ning, Xiang, and Melissa Johnstone, some of whom are with us today, but I'm going to be presenting on behalf of the team. So the first thing to say about this project is, and the presentation today, is that this is a part of a broader project funded through a grant from the Queensland Government, Department of Education, that leverages two major longitudinal national surveys to explore what school factors predict successful long-term outcomes for students from regional, rural, and remote communities in Australia. And you will see I'm going to be using this RRR acronym throughout this presentation, and I'm going to also refer to those students sometimes as a shorthand. I'm going to be talking about regional students, but I always mean regional, rural, and remote is just a bit of a mouthful. So, so this presentation today, as I said, is a part of a broader project. In the broader project, we look at school factors captured across multiple domains, including things like school safety, academic climate, relational aspects, institutional aspects. But for this presentation today, we're going to focus specifically on career guidance and indicators related to career guidance because of obviously of the focus of this conference. Similarly, in the broader project, we look at a broad range of outcomes at various points of student trajectory. So we look at indicators of well-being, social and emotional outcomes, academic performance at school, educational attainment. And we also look at sort of outcomes pertaining to tertiary education and employment. And again, this is going to be the focus of this presentation today. So I'm not going to be talking about all of those because there's just too many of them. And you probably already guessed the pattern. Everything here that in those slides, or a lot of this, that's in purple, which is the UQ University of Queensland colors. That's in purple. That's what's going to be focus of this presentation, as opposed to the broader project. The broader project, we're just about to submit a report to the Department of Education here, and it should be published sometime soon-ish. So yeah, as Dawn with her presentation, please feel free to get in touch, and we'll let you know as soon as it's out. So just for those of you who might not be familiar with Australian sort of geographical realities here, this is just a map of the country, and this is just to illustrate that I'm not sure whether you can see my cursor here, but a vast majority of the population live in major cities, over 70%. So if you look at those really dark and very small dark areas, Brisbane here, Sydney, Melbourne, sort of the cities on the east coast of Australia, as well as Perth, for example, on the western coast of Australia. These are the kind of the big metro agglomerations and cities that really where a lot of the population live. Now, as you probably know, a lot of Australia is sort of desert in the middle, so there's not much in between. But just to give you kind of a sense of the distances here, also, if you were to drive from Perth, for example, on the western coast to Brisbane, where I am, it's nearly 4,500 kilometers. So it's a distance that's a little bit longer than driving from Paris, for example, to Damascus in Syria, and with not much in between here. So this is why regional, rural, and remote students are a very unique group within the Australian context, given this vast geographical distance and between rural and urban centers. And of course, and this is something that we already heard in the previous presentation, which is also true of low SES students, but students in rural areas, particularly in those more remote areas, often lack access to important material and non-material resources, and the same sort of quality services that students in urban schools might have. So it's partially about access to technology, also access to quality career guidance, as we heard in the previous presentation already, but also things like networks to employers, parental networks through parents to employers that students in urban schools might benefit from. So because of those things, regional students have been one of the focal points of policy in Australia. So, for example, in the higher education space, they are one of the officially identified equity groups in terms of participation in higher education. However, despite all of those policy efforts, there is still quite compelling evidence that regional students in Australia have there are gaps between regional students and metro students on a number of outcomes, including academic achievement, university participation rates, participation in work or study, so they are more likely to be in this need category, not in education, employment, or training, as well as tend to report poorer outcomes in other domains, such as worse mental health. And why we think that career guidance might be relevant for bridging some of those gaps. So some of those disparities in career readiness, in particular, that's been pretty well documented, including through OECD research. So we know from previous research, including our own research, that career guidance provided by schools can help address those kinds of disparities. And this is because in comparison with the more advantaged peers, disadvantaged students tend to rely more on schools and careers as sources of information and value the advice they receive from teachers or career practitioners more compared to urban students. They also more positive about their career guidance experiences. Now we know this for disadvantaged students in general, but there is not that much evidence specifically in terms of regional students in Australia, and particularly linking the effect of career guidance to those various outcomes. The other thing to mention here in the context of this presentation is that we draw broadly on the LifeCourse approach, which has been sort of an increasingly influential lens that's been shaping a lot of our own research. And this project leverages the LifeCourse approach by looking at the effects of school factors, including career guidance in particular, on a broad range of outcomes across various stages of the student life cycle. So in the broader project, we look at outcomes during primary school and secondary school, and as I mentioned, these are quite broad sets of outcomes. Here in this presentation, we particularly focus on outcomes pertaining to tertiary education, so really kind of out of the end of secondary and post-secondary, and labor market outcomes, things like being employed or occupational status and wages. So the research questions for this presentation are the following. There are three of them. First, what are the differences between regional and urban young people in Australia in terms of their education and labor market outcomes? Second, what are the effects of career guidance received in school on these outcomes? And third, what are the aspects of career guidance that are particularly relevant to students from regional communities as opposed to their urban peers? So in terms of data, I mentioned before, we use two major longitudinal cohort studies in Australia, the longitudinal study of Australian children and the longitudinal surveys of Australian youth, or LSAY. You might be familiar with those, so I'll be brief. For this presentation, we focus on the LSAY data. We specifically look at 2009 cohort. The LSAY data starts with PISA sample and then follows those students for 10 years. So we're capturing student information from age of 15 up to about 25. And in this particular analysis, we look at school factors. We capture school factors, including those indicators of career guidance, in the first three ways when the students are still at school, and then we follow their outcomes for up to 10 years. And we've got just over 8,000 students in this analytic data set. Our key variable of interest is of course the indicator of rurality. So whether a student is located in one of the rural, regional, or remote communities. So that's about 29% of students, and we compare them with outcomes of urban or metro students, about 71% of those. We've got a set of questions related to career guidance provided through school. So there's 3 questions around help that students receive through school in terms of making decisions about what they want to do after they leave school, choosing subjects and applying for jobs, and then a set of questions about more specialized provision of sort of career guidance related sort of information and services. So talking to career advisors, attending talks about jobs, attending a career expo, or attending specialized information sessions about university or vocational education, technical colleges here. TAFE is the acronym in Australia. In terms of the outcomes, we look at enrolling into higher education degree, enrolling into university course, completing university degree, enrolling into vocational education, as well as 3 outcomes related to employment. So a likelihood of being employed, as opposed to not being employed, entering a managerial or professional occupation, or earning earnings in the top quartile. And we do control for a range of control variables to isolate those effects of career guidance, including for PISA math scores as a proxy for academic ability or achievement. In terms of analytic approach, again, the broader project looks at a range of aspects here. Here in this presentation, I'm going to be focusing mainly on those two things that are highlighted in purple in this first set of bullet points. So we're going to be looking at the main effects. So the looking at the differences in outcomes between regional and metro students, and then we also are going to look at the moderation analysis, which aims at identifying those school factors that are likely to improve the outcomes of regional students to a greater extent than those of metro students. In terms of the analytic methods, the broader project draws on a range of methods, again, including random effects models, growth curve models. Here in this presentation, I'm going just to show you outcomes from event history or survivor analysis. And these are models that model time to an event. So for example, time to university enrollment, or enrollment in vocational education, university completion, or for example, entering in a high status professional or managerial occupation. So here's the first set of outcomes, kind of descriptive. This is what's called a Kaplan-Meier failure function, which you're looking at, and this is the red line represents regional students, the blue one represents metro students. And the way to read those graphs is, as you move from left to right, you see time, and then this is essentially a cumulative probability of that particular event happening. So which can be interpreted as a proportion of young people from that particular background, rural or regional or metro background, who end up, for example, in the top left-hand corner, enrolling into university degree, commencing a bachelor study. So we can see, for example, in this example, when we look at the university as enrollment as a particular outcome, that metro students are more likely overall to enroll in university, and they also on average enroll earlier in university. When we look at the top right-hand side corner, we see that they also more likely to complete university degree. When we look at this top row in the middle, we see that the situation is reversed for vocational studies. So students from young people from regional areas are more likely to enroll into vocational education. When we look at the bottom row in this figure, we see that the red line, when you look at employment, young people from regional areas are more likely to enter employment at a younger ages compared to their metro peers. When we look at the managerial professional occupations, we see a little bit of a gap where regional students are less likely to end up in those sort of occupations. But then when we look at wages in the top quartile, so high earnings, we don't see much of a difference there. So this suggests a difference of trajectories, vocational education, as opposed to university, not managerial or professional occupations, still kind of can land you potentially in terms of similar wages. This is another kind of descriptive slide showing the perceived most important source of career information as reported by students. And there's a couple of interesting things here. So first, when you look at the comparison between regional and metro students, you see that they are very, very similar. So the sources that are important for regional students are the same ones as the ones that are important for metro students. And we see that topping the list here is actually talking to parents or family, followed by talking to career advisors. So we know from previous research and you know the previous presentation also highlighted that the career advisors play a very, very important role. However, this is also to just demonstrate that there are other sources of influence which are equally important that are worth keeping in mind. In this presentation, we're not really focusing on influence of parents or family. We're focusing on those factors that are those aspects of career guidance that are provided through school. So like talking with career advisor. This slide is a bit busy, so let me just talk you through it. This is the main set of results for this project. So this shows you the associations between career guidance and education and labor market outcomes among regional students. These are a set of coefficients from event history analysis. So these are hazard ratios. The way to interpret them is similar to odds ratios that you would be familiar with from logistic regression, for example. So coefficient hazard ratio higher than 1 indicates a positive association, and these are highlighted in green here. A hazard ratio lower than 1 is highlighted in yellow, indicates a negative association. So when we and in columns we've got the outcomes that we look at, and in rows we've got the different aspects of career guidance, indicators related to the provision of career guidance in schools that we examine here in this paper. So when you look at the first, just going row by row, when you look at the first 3 top rows, for example, these are the things that are associated with students seeking help to decide on making choices around subjects or seeking help applying for jobs. These are we see in analysis they tend to be negatively associated with outcomes such as, for example, when you look at this item, school helping to apply for a job, it's negatively associated with commencing university or completing university degree. It's also negatively associating with earning high wages down the track. Now, this might be well reflecting on the types of students who are seeking this sort of help, but also, could in part reflect on the poor quality of resources that are available in regional schools. Now, when we move look at the lower part of this table, when we look at those more specialized career advice services, like talking to career advisor, for example, we see a different pattern, a largely positive outcome. So talking to career advisor in particular is, for example, associated with higher likelihood of obtaining a bachelor degree, so completing university. It's also associated with an increased likelihood of entering a managerial professional occupation down the track. Similarly, job talks are associated with the increased likelihood of being employed and also commencing vocational education. And attending those specialized information sessions, vocational or university information sessions, are associated with the outcomes that you would expect them to be associated with, like attending vocational information session is associated with increased likelihood of commencing vocational studies, and attending university information session is associated with increased likelihood of enrolling into university. Now, on the right-hand side here, we see that both of those are associated with earnings in the top quartile. So these are kind of positive associations here. Now, these associations are not by any means causal. So it could be what could be happening here, of course, is that we're looking at the at upper secondary school here. So by that time, many students would have already made choices, and it's quite likely that students who are already thinking about going into vocational education will come to a information session about that. Those who are already thinking about university would come to the university information session. Still, that all could be happening, but what these outcomes show is that those who do come to those sessions, they tend to have those more positive outcomes compared to those who don't come. And interestingly, when we look at this bottom line, where we actually identified students who might be those kind of still sitting on the fence a bit and a bit undecided, we see that those sessions don't really kind of lead to positive outcomes for them. These are what we're still looking at, as I mentioned, is our set of outcomes for regional students. Now, those circles, those red circles, are the ones where we see that these associations are there for regional students, but they don't appear for metro students, or they appear, but they're much weaker, so significantly weaker. So these are the key factors that seem to be working particularly well and make a particular difference for regional students as opposed to urban students. So this set of results highlights the crucial role that career advisors play for regional, rural, and remote students, because those outcomes are present there. They're not present for or not to the same extent for urban students. Similarly, things like attending those specialized information sessions seem to be driving positive outcomes among regional students to a higher extent compared with their urban peers. So in terms of the summary and conclusions, I'm just going to briefly summarize the results that we've just seen. So first of all, compared with the urban peers, regional students are less likely to enroll in a complete university degree and are more likely to enroll in vocational education, and they also enter employment at a younger age. They are less likely to be employed in professional managerial occupations, but earnings are comparable to those of urban peers. Similar to urban students, regional students identify talking to parents and family and career advisors at school as most important influences on their career choices. Furthermore, talking to career advisor in schools is associated with increased likelihood of completing university and entering a managerial professional occupation among regional students, and to a much higher extent than we see this for urban students. So this just really is one of the key findings here. Attending a job talk is associated with higher likelihood of commencing vocational education and entering employment. And attending a vocational or university information session is associated with higher likelihood of commencing respectively vocational or university courses, and in both cases with increased likelihood of earning high earnings. And I already pointed out. Oh no, maybe I didn't actually. There was a finding that I was going to talk about, but yeah, there's this interesting thing that in the case of VET, vocational education, attending information session seemed to lower the probability of employment in managerial professional occupation, hinting at the differences between vocational and university pathways. But we saw this in those earlier descriptive results, that despite this, that they are less likely to be employed in managerial professional occupation. There are no differences in terms of earnings.